everyone, I'm Allie with Potomac Beads. Join me in making a simple strung bracelet using a button as the accent or the actual focus of the piece. So I've already gone ahead and actually strung on my beads, and I'm using 0.018 Beading wire, and I'm using the 49 strand, so it's nice and flexible as you're working with it. And the beading wire is a cable, and it is a nylon coated stainless steel wire. Because it's stainless steel, you want to have your wire cutters on hand. These are Sparkle tool set. And then you also want a needle nose or flat nose pliers. You can use a crimping pliers, that's up to you. I find that when people are learning, it's really easy just to do the needle nose, do a flat crimp, and then put maybe a crimp cover on it if you want that. So here in my example piece, you can see that I really made the button the nice focus. We're going to do the same thing with some of these cup button. We have a new one in the etched crystal slipperit full, and I think it is so pretty. It looks almost kind of raccoon look in that coating. So I'm going to be using that to be the focus on this bracelet. I have my bracelet strung on that wire, and I have about 12 inches of wire cut. I have on a bead stopper because I'm not yet putting the ends on my bracelet. With something simple like this, I could have put the end on right away and not used a stopper. But if you're doing something like the inspiration for this bracelet, the bracelet I was about to wear today, which is a little bit rough for the wear, you can see you can use any beads, all kinds of different beads. And with this, it's nice to put that stopper on first so you can get that pattern established that you want. I have on about 7 inches or 6.5 inches of my beads, and to highlight the raccoon look, I use the Druzy 8mm beads. You can see some of that polish and that crystal and that funness in it. At the end, I have on my last 8mm bead, and I have my beading wire. I put on a crimp bead, and this is a 2x2mm crimp bead, and I'm going to go up through the button. On the example, I used a shank specifically so I could show you just the wire goes around the shank. If you want to, you can use a wire guard or a wire protector for this. I'm going to just let the metal be exposed in the middle of the cup button, and I'm going to come back down through the cup button. Let that metal hang out right in the middle. If you want to, you could use some beads there as well, since I have 11 no beads on the list. And we're going to take that crimp bead right up to that button. I want the button to be able to move around a little bit, but I don't want to see a ton of extra wire. I'm going to take my needle nose pliers and just kind of flatten out that crimp tube. If you want to, you can add a crimp cover on. A 4x4 or a 4mm crimp cover is going to fit really well on top of a flat crimp, especially with that 2x2. On this side here, I will add that crimp cover first. On the example, I didn't bother to add the crimp cover, I left it exposed. In my piece example, I actually used a crimping pliers and had a fold over in my original bracelet here with the citrine. What I'm going to do here is use the crimp cover so you can see how it's used. And I'm going to put the crimp cover on so that it lines up with the actual crimp bead. So I have the crimp tube here, or that crimp cover, and I'm going to put it over right over that crimp bead. When I put it over, this is a tricky thing to do here on TV or on recording. When I put it in, I want to make sure that you see that little clam opening and that open mouth there, kind of the Pac-Man mouth. You want to make sure that it's laying vertical and you have the actual opening of that crimp bead lying right with it. I'm going to take my needle nose pliers, just pinch down a little bit to close it. The reason that I have it laying so that the crimp tube is lined up with the hole of the thing is so that way we're not opening the crimp tube accidentally as we put on the crimp cover. So now you can see the crimp cover looks like a nice little rounded bead. Some people also will take their crimping pliers into that rounded section of the crimping pliers, use those and hold on to that, and that makes it easier to kind of get in and close up that crimp cover. From here, I'll push up my 6.5, 7 inches of beads, and I kept the beads really, really simple with just one of these antique silver cast irregular beads in between, because I do want the actual button to be the focus of the bracelet. I have about 1.5 inches of wire that I'm going to put back through the beads that are already there. Let those beads kind of fall down onto the end of the clasp there. And now I'm going to go in and add on my loop for my button to go around. So you can see in the example here, what you're going to do first is add on the crimp tube first and then all your seed beads. With a cup button, you need approximately, you're gonna need approximately 25 to 28 11-0 seed beads. With this metal tiara cast one, I used about 30 seed beads in the 11-0s. With my original button, I have on about 22 for that 12mm button. So just have to play around with the actual count. And I use the wire like a needle to pick up my little seed beads. And again, remember, I put on the actual crimp tube first. The first time when I was making my new example, I put on all 30 seed beads and struggled to put those on, and then realized I forgot my crimp tube. So make sure your crimp tube goes on before the actual seed beads. Now, if you didn't want to use seed beads, you could let the wire exposed. The wire is good enough that you can have it exposed and it will be fine for you for your bracelet. Again, if you want to, you can have some wire guards that will actually go through some of the buttons, especially if there's a shank and around. With this technique and this method here, even if you want to keep the wire exposed for the loop, you're not going to use a wire guard on the opposite side. So you would only use one in that case, because obviously you have the loop here that needs to be created. Once you have your 25 to 28 11-0 seed beads, especially depending on the brand, on, we are going to bend the wire back through that original crimp bead. When you're bending it back through the crimp bead, you want to also try to keep all the wire pushed up against the actual beads. I don't want any extra wire exposed in that beads. It's always easier to kind of get that nice and tight when you hold it down on the project and don't have a lot of extra wire exposed. I'm going to take my wire back through that crimp tube, not back through any of the seed beads, and then back through an inch or so of beads and spacer beads. I want to pull the wire out, and then you're going to see that I have those beads kind of pinched down. I have extra wire here at the top. Give a nice little pull, and I'm pulling this wire here that's going to pull all those beads in tight. What you want to make sure before you actually go in and crimp it is that we have enough beads to go around our button, and that it's going to go on the clasp and not be too big for the clasp as well. So I do want a little bit of play and a little bit of space right after those seed beads, because remember, I'm going to go in and add that crimp cover. So I don't want too much, but I want a little bit that I will add that crimp cover, and it'll fit kind of nice rather than being super stiff. So I'm going to push that crimp bead down a tiny bit against my beads. I have a little bit of extra wire there, so that way when I go in and I crimp my beads here, I have enough space that I can go in. After I crimp, go ahead and use your wire cutters, your nice flush wire cutters, pull the wire and push against the beads. That way when you cut the wire off, it'll kind of disappear into one of the beads. Now you can see I have a little bit of extra play space here. That's because I needed to leave a little bit for my crimp cover. Go in and put that crimp cover on. If you're not using a crimp cover, you can actually do it so that you don't have any extra wire exposed. When you are using a crimp cover, you want to get it flat on there and then kind of push down gently to cover up the extra seed beads. Push those seed beads out of the way so you don't by accident kind of crimp down on one of those. Give a nice little crimp to round out the actual crimp cover. Now remember, you don't have to use the crimp cover. It's kind of optional. I just wanted to show you my technique for doing the crimp cover and then for having that on there. And now you're going to have your extra beads there. They go right around the clasp, and now your clasp really does create the focal point for the bracelet. So whether or not you're doing kind of a metal clasp, you're doing a cup button clasp, we even have some awesome table cup buttons. I'm going to do this for the next one, and that gives you that clasp as the focus, and it also allows you, especially if you're doing some of the cup buttons, to not use metals for those that are allergic on the actual metals, and have that as the focus to kind of make the bracelet a little bit more interesting and not just throw another toggle on there. Thanks so much for watching this simple strung bracelet. Remember, if you need any materials, like any really fun buttons, you can click on links below the video to get links to the ones that we used in this video. You can shop with us online at PotomacBeads.com as well as PotomacBeads.eu and gather up an array of different materials and make the button the actual focus, mixing the button with the actual beading cable wire rather than with simple seed beading or with using thread and needles. As always, if you like this video and the ideas that are behind it, you can give a little thumbs up. You can also press the bell below and subscribe to this YouTube channel. You'll get regular updates then when we go live, when we have better beader episodes, simple techniques, as well as more complicated projects. As always, have fun beading, and thank you so much for watching from all of us here at Potomac Beads.